So today we celebrate the communion service, the foot washing service, and the symbols of bread and grape juice that we take remind us that Jesus was willing to serve us, his brothers and sisters, even to the point of giving his life. We're reminded in this service of the call to follow our Lord's example and so love and so serve one another. I once heard Pastor Daniel Duda preach a sermon entitled The Essence of Reality. You might see that's the title of the sermon today. Elder Duda is currently the director of the Department of Education for the Trans-European Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I don't recall exactly what position of responsibility he held at the time that I heard him preach. And truthfully, I almost certainly would have no memory of what he preached. Frankly, I probably wouldn't even know that he preached, had it not been that I took some notes of the general outline of his sermon at the time. And the truth is, I took some notes because it was one of those all-day, several days meetings thing going on where you realize by the middle of the afternoon your ability to focus might be a bit hindered. So I thought maybe if I take some notes that will happen, or that will help. And then as I took some notes of the main points of his sermon, I started to realize that I was taking notes not because I should, but because I wanted to. But because what he was saying was, I found to be quite thought-provoking. So later on, as I reviewed those notes and reflected on that sermon, it occurred to me that the gist of his message I thought would be very valuable to contemplate in preparation for the communion service. Now, his sermon was a good probably 45 minutes long, but don't be alarmed. Relax. You can breathe. What I'm going to do today is just simply share with you in a much shorter format some of the highlights and some of the ideas that he presented. He wasn't preaching at all in the context of a communion setting or a communion service. He wasn't really talking about a communion service at all. But as I reviewed what he said, I think there are some ideas in what he said that can be very relevant for us today as we share in the communion service. So he asked the question, what is reality? I mean, that's a big question. And the answer to that question, he suggested, is God. God is what is real. He is the ultimate reality. Pastor, and that shouldn't be so hard for us as Christians to accept. Pastor Duda then followed that with another question. He said, if we accept that God is reality, then what is the essence of reality? You can maybe think about that for a moment or two. If God is reality, what is the essence of reality? And I found that the answer he suggested was quite intriguing to me because he went in a direction I didn't expect. You know, you kind of have a thought of where you think he's maybe going to go with this, but I was surprised by his answer, and it made me think. He proposed that the essence of reality is community. Community. It's not what I was thinking he would say. And yet for most people, in fact, probably for most Christians, the essence of reality is not community. Probably for many, particularly of us Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we probably are more prone to tend to see the essence of reality as being truth rather than community. We're pretty big on the truth. The truth often is our focus. But if truth is not put into practice, it's of really no value, right? And truth is put into practice, if you think about it, in the setting of community. That's where truth really plays out. Pastor Duda then made a very discerning and interesting point. He suggested that if we as Christians, if we as Seventh-day Adventist Christians were to put more of our resources, more of our time and our effort and our money into building community rather than in just trying to get people to accept our truth, he suggested we would probably be way further ahead. Interesting thought. Interesting point to ponder, especially as we consider our evangelistic meetings that we do and our outreach endeavors. We're about to begin a series of evangelistic meetings this next week coming up. Why are we doing that? If we're just conveying truth, in kind of a cold, sterile atmosphere, how useful is that? See, because we can share truth with people, but if we don't have a genuine, loving community in which people have the opportunity to put that truth into practice, then the reality that we know is this, that many people will not join with us no matter how well we may support our truth from the Bible. We might have it locked down from the Bible, but if truth is just sort of like in a sterile test tube in the universe's laboratory, then it doesn't have the same impact. You know, we hear sometimes the mission reports, and we read and we see sometimes large numbers of people who join the church in other parts of the world, right? They had a baptism. 300 people were baptized. Why is that? Because they are presenting the same Bible truth that we are. Same truths that we present here in this context. And that's no doubt a complex question and involves many facets and factors. And yes, there is clearly in many areas the very real issue of society having a much less comfortable lifestyle than we like to enjoy here in North America, perhaps. So the need and desire for God and His influence in life maybe is more evident and pronounced in a place where there's more perceived need than in a place where we feel like we've pretty well got things under control. And yet, aside from that, I wonder if perhaps our fellow Christians in some other parts of the world, I wonder if perhaps they've done a better job at building community. Could that be another aspect involved? Maybe economic need, maybe different cultures and different traditions make community easier to build than perhaps in a materialistic, secular, individualistic society like we live in here in Canada, like ours. So we may do well to honestly ask ourselves if we're willing to make community a priority. Is that really important to us? Because let's face it, we have plenty of evidence that cold, hard truth alone doesn't really seem to draw very many people. You know? People might say, you know, you're right. That is the truth. Good for you. Hope you enjoy it. There's got to be something more that goes along with it. And community is something that definitely has an appeal. And yet I find some of the ways that we go about seeking community in today's society are rather intriguing if you think about it. Because we tend to immerse ourselves in social media. We Facebook and we Snapchat and we tweet and we blog and we read other people's blogs and we join online chat groups. And I'm not saying that these things are bad at all. That's not my point. But I do find it kind of fascinating that so many people are interested in spending so much time away from people so that they can check up and check in with people. Doesn't that seem strange? I don't have time for people because I got to check with people. And it seems in too many cases it's people who are far removed from us in space or time who we are, most anxious to be connected with. I am a absolute laggard on this thing. I'm like a generation behind or something. I finally gave in and joined Facebook like a year ago. Finally. And in the last year I've checked in twice. So if you want to know about my life, don't go to my Facebook page because there's nothing on it, not even a picture. I think you have my name and my birthday. That's about it. But I've found it interesting over the years and surprised sometimes by some of the people who invite me to be their friend. And I'm like, what? Really? You want me to be your friend? Because, 30 years ago, when we saw each other almost like every day, you showed no interest in being my friend. You never spoke to me. You never showed the slightest interest in me. And now you want to be my friend. Why is my life now of particular interest to you? Doesn't make sense to me. I barely even remember who you are. So please understand, I am not trying to trash Facebook. I'm not trying to criticize communicating with people and groups of people through means of social media. It can provide a very meaningful, fun, and useful way to connect with other people. All right? Just hear that. Today's amazing technology certainly has positive elements. It allows people the opportunity to be able to connect with both old and current friends, to be able to connect with people who maybe have similar interests. There's lots of good things about it. I just wonder sometimes if in all of that we remember how important it is to, first of all, find a little bit of time for the people around us who presumably would be the ones most important for us to have community with. Would that seem to make sense? One witness. And as I muse about the popularity of the whole phenomenon of social media, I have to wonder if maybe at least part of the whole appeal of this idea of a virtual community and a community in the world is maybe it provides a relatively safe and easy way for people to have something they want, and that is to be able to feel a part of a group, to feel that sense of community. In fact, perhaps it's easier and safer than risking to try to be a part of the community of people where you live, and where you work, and where you go to school, and where you worship. Perhaps behind the safety of my computer, perhaps in the safe barrier of my tablet or my smartphone. Maybe it's a little easier to be accepted, and maybe even rejection doesn't feel quite as personal when it's removed by a screen between us. And so I can connect daily with people and be a part of their lives and share my life without the challenges of actually having to very often be with many of them in person. It's a lot easier to be friends with people that you rarely see or have to interact with, right? Because they don't bother you too much, and when they have their bad days, you're not around to see it, right? Perhaps our phenomenal fascination with the various forms of social media only highlights what is true, and that is our society's desperate desire for community. Why do we buy into this so much? Because in us we have a need for community. Community has a definite appeal. And so the question is it a priority for us as Christians? Is it a priority for us as a church? Pastor Duda suggested that the mission of the church is to love and to be loved. And really, that's what community is all about. And he actually began his sermon by asking why so many people in our society today see the church as irrelevant. And the answer could be maybe that we don't remember to live up to our mission. That is, we need to love and to be loved, to serve and be served. That's what community is all about. Pastor Duda pointed out that at the second coming of Jesus, we don't go up to meet Jesus individually, right? How does the Bible describe it? The Bible says that we go up collectively together to meet him in the air. We don't go to God in like a single-seat plane. We go to God like in a jumbo jet, like a 767 Dreamliner stuffed with as many people as you can get in. That's the picture of us going together to connect with God as a community. And when you think about it, when everything else on this earth is destroyed, what's left? The only thing that's left is community. Christ and his beautiful bride, the church. That's what's left. It's relationship that's left when everything else is gone, community. So maybe you saw it, or maybe you can picture it in your mind. It's the Olympic Games. It's the 100-meter race. It's the 1992 Olympic Games. And the athletes are in place, lined up on their starting marks, and the starting gun cracks through the air, and as it does, the runners all begin to sprint forward at their fastest pace. But maybe after 10 or 20 meters, one of the sprinters suddenly trips and falls sprawling forward onto the track. And the other runners continue on to run for a few meters. And then without speaking to one another, they all just seem to instinctively stop. And together they stop and they return back to that fallen runner and they help her up and they brush her off. And then they link arms together and arm they run the rest of that race and they cross the finish line together. Really happened. 1992 Olympics. 1992 Special Olympics. We call them special Maybe they are special. Because all of those runners in that particular race have Down syndrome. Is that what's important? That's not really what's important. What is much more important is that those athletes in that act provided us with a wonderful example, a living, real-life, on-the-spot demonstration of what community is really all about. Think about it. Relationships are the most precious commodities that we as humans have. Relationships are the most precious and yet ironically also the most vulnerable and the most fragile things that both God and we humans have in the universe. What do you have that is more precious than a relationship? And what do you have that is more vulnerable and fragile than a relationship? You know what? Jesus Christ could have just told us the truth about the value of serving one another. He could have said, I'm telling you, I know the best thing you people can do is serve one another. That's the truth. And he could have just told us the truth that he was willing to die for us. He could have said, I am telling you for certain that I love you so much that I would die for you. He could have just told us that truth. But instead, what did he do? He came and he revealed those truths to us in the setting of community, as he shared a meal with those with whom he had a relationship. And he left us this communion service that we participate in today as a way of remembering and applying these truths that he gave us in the setting of community. Because the fact is, you can't really fully, properly celebrate the communion service by yourself. If you just come and sit there till the sermon's over and go home, or sit there till the whole thing's done, have you really done communion? Have you really been a part of what this service is about? It's pretty hard to do all alone. Washing one another's feet, sharing the symbols of Christ's sacrifice, it forces us to contemplate the truths of Christ's life and love and death in the context of our church community. That makes us consider our relationships with not only our Lord, but also with one another. And so I simply want to appeal to us, to you and me today, as we do communion, to make our celebration of these ordinances today a time for us to build relationships. This is a time, one little thing that we can do that helps us to build community. And the more of us that are involved, the more community we get a chance to build. And so I want to say to our guests, to our visitors who are here today, we practice an open communion service in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. What does that mean? That means that any Christian who has a faith relationship with Jesus Christ is welcome to freely participate. You don't have to be a member of the church per se. Now, if you're a guest and you would feel a little more comfortable simply watching, because you might say, did that guy really say foot washing? Is that really what he said? If you're not familiar with our communion service and you would like to just observe part or all that we do in the communion service, you're welcome. You're invited. You're encouraged. We hope that you'll do that. We hope that you'll stay by. And whether you actively participate or not, we want to hope that you will be a part of this special time of worship that we do together as a church family, as a community. We don't do it every week. We don't do it every month. We do it about 4 times a year so that we remember that it's something special and it's something that has meaning. And so we're going to go do the foot washing part of our communion service, and then we're going to come back here and we're going to take the bread and the juice that represent Christ's sacrifice for us. I want to remind you of a couple of things. The gentlemen do the foot washing service in the upper room. There's stairs to the upper room in the back corner of the lobby. The ladies do that over on this side of the church in the youth chapel. And sometimes it's nice to share the foot washing service with your husband or wife. And that's done in the fellowship hall on this side. When you come back into the sanctuary, the deacons are standing there with the offering containers. Now that's not to catch you if you missed the offering the first time. This is a specific offering that we do as part of our tradition during our communion services. We collect an extra offering for our benevolent fund, which is something we use to help people inside and outside of our church who might find themselves in an unexpected kind of emergency situation and need a little bit of help. We keep some funds, and that's where those funds come from, this special offering. It's also during our foot washing time is when we have our children's story. And so children are invited to come to the front, and they get to hear a story until the rest of us come back for the end of our worship service. So let's enjoy some community today as we do communion.